Hi, I'm Mikey Jeanson, a gameplay programmer with a background in Unreal Engine and C++. I've helped make several games including Your Average Bear, but now I'm a full-time UEFN developer, and this is Verse Boost. Hey, what's going on, everybody? Today we're going to be talking about extensions, what they are and how to use them. Bottom line is use extension methods to add functionality to existing classes, keyword there, and extension methods will also allow you to write cleaner and more maintainable code. And to show that off, I have made a persistent data class that we'll go over in a minute, but I wanted to look at a couple popular extension methods. One of the most popular is get fork character. You know, we're using this all the time if we want to, damage, teleport, all that good stuff. If you're working in scene graph, well, I know a lot of people are staying away from it. I'm actually crazy enough to dive into it, but it's pretty broken. I'll give that honest review. But yeah, these are all extension methods. You see here we have the type entity, and then the dot, right? And then the method. And we don't see the, what the method definition is, but we know what it's doing. And here's some simple ones that I use in my utilities class. This is a class that is not publicly available, but it's simple stuff. This is kind of just to be shorthand so I don't have to write this all out every time. I have an agent and I want to get their transform. Call this, right? And if I'm, in a creative device and I want to get all the participants, I call this. So these are simple extension methods that I have, and they can get more complex, and we'll see them in our persistent data class. All right, going over our persistent data, we have some simple stuff. This is just an example class, first of all, but it will be available on my website, and it is a good starter for persistent data. I highly recommend doing it like this. But you'll see here we've got some ints, we got some arrays of ints, and we got a float. So let's look at lifetime eliminations. Let's say in our class, we want to monitor eliminations, and then we want to record how many they got. So if we want to do that, we have to do quite a lot of stuff just to add, a number by one in our persistent data, right? We have to first, we're getting maybe an agent. We have to cast it to a player. We have to check if the player is active. If you guys are familiar with persistent data, the reason we have to do this is because in our weak map, our globally available, modular, accessible weak map, with a key of a player, if the player's not in your session and you try to access that data, it will actually crash your game. But yeah, you see here we have to check is active, get the data, and then we have to do this and call the constructor, pass along the player data that we already have. If you haven't worked in persistable data, there's obviously a lot of stuff online for it, but we have the constructor here. It just takes the data we pass in and it sets all the things, and then our lifetime eliminations, we get what it was, and then we add one. So it's really simple, but you'll notice that if we wanted to do this somewhere else in the code, we'd have to write that all out. And then if we want to make a change somewhere, it just is really tedious and over-cumbersome, if that's a word. It can really overwhelm you. So that's why I created some extensions. Before we go into the extensions, you'll notice we have a persistable data key. I've obviously gone on my rant about strings and how I hate them. Kind of a joke, not really. But enums are my preferred replacement for strings. And then we have a type alias here. I don't know if you guys have ever seen this before, but you can look up what type aliasing is. But basically, every time I use PDK in the rest of the code, it knows that it's a persistable data key. So if you're tired of writing this all out every time you use enum, you can use type aliasing, and it will shorten up your keystrokes and maybe be less of a burden on you. So you can see that we're using it here in our set data. This is our first extension. Well, actually, our first extension is a get data, and this basically just does these two things. We could remove this. We could even remove this and this. Not the P, but we could do that, and it would actually return the same. We don't even need to have the return keyword there, but this just getting the data from the player, and it does a couple quick things like checking is it active so we don't crash our game. And we use that right here and get set data. You'll see that we're passing along the data key with our persistent data key and the value we want to set it to. You'll also notice that we only have version and lifetime eliminations in our case statement. And all the other ones, we're saying, hey, this is a warning. We're not supporting this data key. And that's because it only makes sense to have ints for this one. And then we have, for float, we have our health regen per second. And then for our array, we have our levels completed and our items purchased. So you might notice that if you want to increase, lifetime eliminations, you have to pass in the correct value. So you'd have to get the data before you even set the data. So you'd have to call get data probably twice. And obviously that's not ideal in most cases. If you know what you want to set it to before getting the data, then you can do that, right? If you want to reset it or something like that. But that is why I have this other method here called add data. And you can do different things, different ways to do it. But add data gets the value to add. In this case, it's going to be 1 probably. And we're going to use the player and we're going to get the data. And then we go to lifetime eliminations after the case statement. And we do all this work. It's still tedious to type this out the first time. But that's the thing. You only have to type it out once. And if you want to make a change later, you only have to make that change in one spot, right? We don't have to make that change all over the place. And you'll see that we have it for floats down here. And we don't have an array one because if we only want to add one value to the array, then it's fine. If we want to add more than one value to the array, then we would have to make another extension method. But it wouldn't be that hard, especially if you're using Copilot or something like that, or the Epic's First Assistant or something like Epic Developer Assistant, whatever it's called. So if you want to see how that works in action, right, let's just go back to what it looked like before and imagine, if you're only using this once, then this is fine, right? It's not that big of a deal because you have to type it out once anyway. But if you're using that multiple times in different modules and different places in your code, then how much better is this, right? We don't even need these 2 lines here. These are just debugging lines, but it's just 2 lines now instead of whatever it was before, like 5 or 6. And all we do is we get the player from the maybe agent, and then we do the dot for the extension method, add data, and then we are doing a transacts and decides method, so we have the brackets, and we're saying we want to change the lifetime eliminations, and we're adding 1 to whatever the current value is. And you can see we're using it in other places too. It's really simple. These are just one-liners if you already have the player. So it's really simple, and like I said, it will help you, write cleaner and more maintainable code. And obviously all these extension methods are to existing classes. So if you guys enjoyed the video, please leave a like and leave a comment if you want me to cover something else. Hopefully you guys enjoy your weekend. It's been good. Like I said, this code will be posted on my website, Daedalus Studios/firstboost. And if you are unfamiliar with using persistent data, this is a good class to help you out. Using extension methods, I think, is imperative onto writing good code for persistent data. This is how I would write it for a basic implementation. I have an implementation that I'm using currently right now that is way too complex for this video, so we'll go over that in a later date. But this is great. This is a great, the reason I am talking about a more complex system is because I'm a maniac I'm trying to modularize everything. And don't be like that, okay? Because it's tiresome and tedious. Have a great weekend. I'll stop ranting. Goodbye.